Hi, I'm John McCusker. I'm a news photographer here in New Orleans, but on the weekends I run something I call the Cradle of Jazz tour, in which we visit the places where jazz was first played, talk about how jazz music came together, and learn about the early pioneers like Louis Armstrong, King Oliver, and Jelly Roll Morton. Whether you're an ardent jazz fan or just someone that's curious about the music, I think you'll enjoy it and have a little fun. We'll see the places where these people lived and learn about the culture that produced what we call America's original music form. And they danced, as they had in West Africa, to drum instruments and gourd instruments in the open air. Well, the Americans felt they had to do something, but they didn't feel they could just knock it out. So what they did was they passed a law in 1808 banning dancing at the city's market, save for the one that used to be right here where we're seated. Instead of going to the market and seeing 50, 60, 100 Africans dancing, since they all had to come here, there would see 500 Africans dancing. And Congo Square, as this became known, became a sensation. It was the first breakfast at Brennan's, the first Preservation Hall, the first Café du Monde, the first must-do thing when you visited New Orleans. And beginning in 1808, visitor after visitor that comes to New Orleans says, oh, you must see Congo Square once in its glory. A lot of books will point to Congo Square, and they'll say, here it is, there's the beginnings of jazz. But I'm going to submit to you that the music that was being played here did not resemble the Saints Go Marching In. However, what I'm going to submit to you is that the idea of public dancing, of being out in the open air with your community, that had an influence on jazz. In the 1720s and 1730s, when an African ran away from his slave masters in New Orleans, there was but one place to go, to the Indian nations. And there are depictions in the Cabildo Museum that show Africans living among Indians. There was clearly a kinship, and it didn't take long for the red man and the black man to figure out who the common enemy was. They formed maroon gangs from the Spanish word cimarron and attacked white settlements. In fact, Natchez, Mississippi was wiped out by such a gang in 1735. This alliance between them continued into the Spanish period in Louisiana in the 1760s and 1770s. In fact, a law was passed banning Africans from wearing feathers. That may have had something to do with the Indians. Certainly the dancing that was going on in the call and response singing of Congo Square is of the same vein as the music of the Mardi Gras Indians. As you listen to their music, you'll hear the leader will call and the group will respond. This is probably the best idea we'll ever get of what the music of Congo Square sounded like. So the idea of playing music without notes and dancing in the open air with the community. Those with a little bit of European influence would feed into the jazz tradition, particularly the dance. Because with a little bit of European influence, that African dancing would become something called the second line. Now, what is the second line and how did that happen? Well, let's take a walk to the other side of the park and find out. So how did the African dancing evolve into this thing I call the second line? Well, that brings us to our very first landmark today. This is Perseverance Hall number 4. It's the second oldest Masonic hall in the Mississippi River Valley. It was built around the time of the War of 1812. Y'all remember that, don't you? And we get an idea of how important these societies were in the lives of people when we look at the 3 contracts that they would sign every year. The first one was with an undertaker. These societies were, at their root, burial societies. Why was that so important? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, New Orleans had the highest mortality rate of any American city. In the 1853 yellow fever epidemic, 10,000 African Americans died at one hospital alone. And that's who made it there. But in New Orleans, you can't put somebody in a simple pine box and throw them in the ground because of the water table. So that's why we construct these elaborate above-ground cities of the dead. The thing of it is, though, that costs a lot more money than just putting somebody in a pine box. So these societies were a hedge against that. They were cooperatives, and you put in money, when you died, you got a death benefit. That's the first contract. The second one was with a doctor or pharmacy. Now, the third one, which is a little more on point on why we're all here today, the third contract was with a brass band. What better way to go to the ever-loving arms of Jesus than with a great big brass band parade? There were at any given time between 200 and 500 benevolent societies in New Orleans, each with several hundred members. Now, if you're only parading out of 20 Sundays and you've got 200 societies, you've got to have enough musicians in town to make up enough brass bands to parade for as many organizations as you have on that Sunday. So what happened was, this benevolent society lodge movement spins off a brass band movement. And it's out of those brass bands that every future jazz star, from King Oliver to Louis Armstrong to Kid Ory, that's where they cut their musical teeth. It was their common musical experience. Now, where does the African dance come in? Well, here's the part that's different. Lots of places have parades, and you stand there and watch the parade go by. But the brass band procession, the anniversary parade through the neighborhood, was not a Mardi Gras parade that you stood and watched go by. It was an invitation to dance, as the drums at Congo Square on Sunday had been an invitation to dance. And you fell out of your house and came out and danced behind the organization, or on the side of it, or in front of it. That practice is called second lining. When you were in that group, you were part of the second line. You're not part of the parade organization, you're the general community, and you're dancing along with them. No longer in a circle, like Africans, but going down the street as African Americans. Talk about now is the blues. Now, the blues is a music you can play from the written form, but it just doesn't sound right. It's a music that invites the musician to play the music their own way, to put their own feeling in it. Emotional quality and depth in the blues is far more important than being a virtuoso technician on the instrument. And the thing of it was, the emergence of the blues puts these brass bands in sort of a conundrum. How so? Well, we talked about the second line. Now, the second line, the people that follow your parades, your anniversary parades, they are at once your fans and your critics. So, if there are 2 parades on a given Sunday, And you know, one of the brass bands is still playing all that old polka and march music, and the other one is going to be playing the blues. Which parade are you going to go to? So the people in the societies who are sponsoring the parades can go, wow, we had 500 people on our second line last year, now we've got 200. Maybe we ought to rethink that band contract. So in that way, the emergence of jazz is very American. You've got market forces at work. But the problem was that these brass bands couldn't just go buy this music and play it. They had to embrace a new type of musician, a musician who was known as a get-off man, someone who could play the music their own way and get the crowd excited. This was the home of Charles Buddy Bolden, born in 1877, and he's considered the first trumpet player in New Orleans to play jazz. He was known for his volume, and he was so loud, Kid Ory said, that he couldn't practice in the house. He'd blow everybody out of it. So he used to sit on the stoop to practice his horn. The neighborhood children would gather around his feet yelling, "It's King Bolden." That was the esteem with which he was held in his community.
Thought I heard Buddy Bolden sing, "You nasty but you dirty, take it away. You're terrible, you're awful, take it away." I thought I heard him sing.
We're standing at the corner of Rampart and Perdido Street. Today it's a field of parking lots with a few orphan buildings standing in the 400 block. This was ground zero as far as the development of jazz was concerned. And this block was the front of the area that was known as the back of town. The back of town was an expansive black ghetto where Louis Armstrong grew up, where Buddy Bolden first brought jazz to the limelight, where Johnny Dodds first practices playing the clarinet. The building behind me was, around the turn of the century, the Oddfellows of Masonic Hall Ballroom. And it's on the third story of that building that many people first heard the great Buddy Bolden. George Bakke, a Creole clarinetist, talks about coming and hearing Bolden in this building. He said he played in a rough atmosphere. In fact, he said the Oddfellows Hall was so rough that no one ever took their hat off. That's in case they had to get out in a hurry. He says that Bolden, before the job, would come and stick his cornet out the third story window and do what he called calling his children home. When he played, everyone would come out of the halls that were up and down the street to hear him. And you know that they always heard him, because while people disagree about whether Bolden's style was sweet or rough, they all agreed on one thing: he was loud. Jelly Roll Morton called him the blowingest man since Gabriel.
I thought I heard Buddy Bolden shout, "Open up that window and let that bad air out. Open up that window and let that foul air out." Yes, I thought I heard Buddy Bolden say.
If you look past the Oddfellows Hall, you'll see the Iroquois Theater, between 1914 and 1920, a vaudeville house where the likes of Morton, Armstrong, and Clarence Williams performed. Black vaudeville was a very unique type of entertainment. Whereas if you were white in many cities, there would be venues for the opera and the circus and everything in between. If you were black in most cities, there was only one venue open to you. And between 1914 and 1920, the Iroquois fit that bill.
haters go inside. Look at those demonstrators, talk of town, green and brown, picking them up and laying them down while your friends and fools. That's what they like to call them. They're in a class all alone. The only way for them to lose is to cheat them. You may tie them, but you'll never beat them. Spread your stuff, boy, you won't do nothing different. Cake walking babies from home.
One of the persistent myths in jazz is that jazz was created in Storyville and that it slowly crept out and took over the rest of the world from there. But in fact, that may not have been the case at all. Research over the last years suggests that the opposite may have been true. The jazz developed in the city of New Orleans and slowly crept into Storyville. Of the many places that you could hear music in New Orleans in the early part of the century, the lakefront, the riverboats, the dance halls, the place where music was banned for many years was Storyville. There are accounts of policemen going into bars filled with pimps, gamblers, and prostitutes and arresting the one bloke that had a cornet. But since music was everywhere, little by little, jazz did creep into Storyville. This building on the right-hand side was the Early Saloon, run by a guy named Frank Early. It looked a little different back then. It wasn't all covered up with stucco. And upstairs, they had furnished rooms that didn't refer to furniture. It was furnished with something other than furniture. This building right here was built in 1908 by Lulu White. Her Mahogany Hall Bordello, which you see in the right-hand picture of Storyville in your booklet, was next door. This was an auxiliary business. On the first floor, they had various shows, they would throw dances, and sometimes they would have bands here. Mahogany Hall used to stand here at 235 Basin Street. It's gone now, and we've replaced it with this. But on the second story of Lulu White's saloon there in the corner, the second story was taken off in Hurricane Betsy. Don't worry, it's not like I see a second story that you don't see. It was there in 1965, but that's where they had a printing press, and they would run off the Blue Book. Well, what was the Blue Book? The Blue Book was sort of the combination yearbook yellow pages of prostitution. It had the names of all the girls in it, their various talents, which are always couched in these most delightful euphemistic phrases. If you ever get a copy of the Blue Book, they have some at the Old Mint. You're going to the museum there, you'll get to read some of them. They're hilarious. Of course, all jazz men didn't come from New Orleans. We're in Laplace, Louisiana, in front of the Woodland Plantation. And it was around here that the first important trombonist in jazz grew up, and his name was Edward Ory. Kid Ory wasn't born in that house. His father was of the wealthy plantation-owning and at one time slave-owning Ory family of St. John the Baptist Parish. His name was Azame Ory, but his friends called him John. His mother was named Octave Devizan, and she was a Creole of color. They had 13 kids together, 7 of them lived, and the third youngest was Kid Ory. As a result of his father taking up with this woman of a different race, he was ostracized by his family and spent most of his life living in small buildings like this one on the outskirts of the Woodland Plantation. They all worked in the sugarcane business, and Ory's earliest experiences were working as a water boy during the sugarcane harvest. This convinced him of one thing: he had no interest in working in the plantation. He got a bunch of friends on the plantation together and they made their own instruments. After a few years, they saved up money and bought real instruments, and by 1905, Ory had settled on the trombone. Ory put together a band called the Woodland Band, named after the plantation. It was made up of kids he had grown up with. They played to earn a few extra cents here and there, but most of them supported themselves by working in the sugarcane fields. But the appeal of the big city and the fame and fortune that they were convinced awaited them there was too much, and by 1910 the Woodland Band relocated to New Orleans. He had visited here a few times in the early part of the 1900s. He bought his first trombone in 1905 and came back to his sister's house here on Jackson Avenue to try it out, and that's when he met Buddy Bolden. And Buddy Bolden was clearly one of his main influences early on. By 1910, his entire band was here, and by 1913, he was living in this house behind us at 2135 Jackson Avenue. In 1910, when Kid Ory comes to New Orleans, his band is made up of kids from the plantation. But in the following years, his groups will be made up of future jazz stars like Louis Armstrong, King Oliver, Johnny Dodds, and Sidney Bechet. And with Ory's band, jazz crosses over from simply the music of black honky-tonks to the music of the moment. Everybody's listening to it. When a white debutante is having her debut, she says, "Daddy, I must have the Kid Ory band." One of the people who really cut their teeth in Ory's band was King Oliver. Ory says when he met King Oliver, Oliver was all wet. His tone was bad. He was just playing loud. Well, eventually Oliver and Ory throw their lot in together, and it becomes the Ory-Oliver Band. And they become the hottest band in the city. Here on Dryde Street, we see the home of Joe King Oliver, the mentor of Louis Armstrong and the leader of King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band. Louis Armstrong used to visit King Oliver here, and he always loved the big piles of red beans that his wife Stella would fix for him. They always knew that Joe Oliver was home because when he snored at his bedroom window there, the windows rattled. It's important to point out and remember that jazz in 1915 is not an esoteric listening music. It's dance music. It's occasional music. Whether you're playing in the streets for a second line parade, or if you're playing at a country club for the blue bloods of society, it's for dancing. And the music always had to inspire people to want to move their feet. Now, while Kid Ory was playing with the nuances and ensemble dynamics of the jazz combo, and King Oliver was becoming jazz's first truly great instrumental soloist, something interesting happened. New Orleans jazz was recorded. And interestingly, it wasn't by a black band, but by a white band, a group called the Original Dixieland Jazz Band. We're in the Irish Channel of New Orleans in front of the home of Dominic LaRocca, the leader of the Original Dixieland Jazz Band. It was this group that made the very first jazz record in 1917. Nick LaRocca is known as a composer, and his most famous composition is the jazz standard Tiger Rag. If you look at the ironwork on the front door of his house, you'll see 2 bars from the chorus of that song. How did the first jazz record come to be made? Well, the guys you see there, the Original Dixieland Jazz Band, they trained in brass bands as well, but they trained in the brass bands of Papa Jack Lane, who you can see in the picture above them. He's all the way to the right. Jack Lane was sort of a one-man musicians union. And if you were having a picnic or a party or a funeral and you needed a band, you called Jack Lane. He had 6 brass bands and string bands, and they were all named Reliance. The number 1 band, the number 2 band, the number 3 band. Well, the story goes, a guy came here from Chicago and he heard a band which featured Jack Lane and Nick LaRocca, who's the cornet player in the Original Dixieland Jazz Band. And he said, man, I've never heard music like that before. I got to take y'all up to Chicago to play. So he leaves and books an engagement, and he brings Nick LaRocca and some of Jack Lane's other musicians up to Chicago. And they start playing for these very sophisticated people in Chicago, and a lot of them just stand there and stare at the band. They finally had to put a sign up that said, this music is for dancing. The band later moved to New York, and in February 1917 made the record that's considered the first jazz record, Livery Stable Blues. That was the very first million seller in popular music history. The newspapers called it organized disorganization. It's not a bad description, really. There were photo opportunities where they took the band to the Central Park Zoo in New York to play for the animals to see if it would elicit a reaction. And for the better part of 5 years, the Original Dixieland Jazz Band was, for all intents and purposes, the one real jazz band that had made records. There were many other records with jazz in the title and jazz in the name of the band, but to make a great generalization, most of these were just terrible. They thought all you had to do was play fast and loud and you had jazz. Well, the Original Dixieland Jazz Band did play fast and loud, but there was a little bit more to New Orleans jazz than just that. The next pioneer we're going to talk about is the person I consider jazz's first genius. He was its first great composer. He was the first really great piano player, as distinct from the ragtime piano players. He was one of the great recording artists of the 1920s, and finally, he was the man that gave jazz a sense of itself. He was the first one to give it a sense of its history and where it had come from. He was born Ferdinand Joseph Lameth in 1889, but we know him by the name Jelly Roll Morton. He lived here from around the time of his birth in 1890 till around 1899. He grew up in a family that valued music, but they didn't want their members going into music as a profession. So this caused a lot of friction with Jelly Roll and his stepfather. So around 1899 he moved out and went and lived with his godmother in another part of town. Jelly Roll Morton was jazz's first great pianist, its first great composer, and one of the great band leaders of the 1920s. Many of the most elegant recordings, including his composition, The Sidewalk Blues,
Hey, get out of the way. What are you trying to do? Knock the streetcar off the track. You're so dumb, you should be the president of the Deaf and Dumb Society. I'm sorry, boss, but I got the Sidewalk Blues.
We're at the Rivertown celebration in Kenner. This is where they celebrate Lundi Gras, in other words, the Monday before Fat Tuesday. This has become a tradition in Kenner, a city on the outskirts of New Orleans, and they have the King of Zulu arrive, and he meets with some of the other kings of carnival royalty, and they have a big party just to celebrate the party that's coming. It's sort of the pre-party party.
Jazz is a new tradition which grew out of many older traditions. One of the most famous of all of our cultural practices is Mardi Gras. It goes to the root of the difference between New Orleans and the rest of North America. We were founded by the French, not the English, and they brought with them their cultural practices. The men behind me with flames are called flambeau carriers. In the old days, before streetlights, the parades in New Orleans were lighted by these fellas. And today, they're sort of a modern affectation and a nostalgic reminder of Carnival's past. This float is called the Smoky Mary. It's named after a railroad that used to run from the French Quarter all the way to Millingburg, which was a resort out on Lake Pontchartrain.
Jazz would not be what it is without the influence of the great Louis Armstrong. It would have existed without him, but he changed the course it took, and indeed the course of American popular music. Pretty remarkable when you consider that he was a bastard child that nobody wanted. He spent much of his life as a street waif wandering up and down Rampart Street here. But luckily, around the age of 7, he was taken in by a Lithuanian Jewish family named the Karnofskys. He became their 13th child. One of the things that they did that he loved was feed him. Louis loved to eat, and he used to sign his letters, "Red beans and ricely yours." The Karnofskys had many businesses, a coal delivery business, they worked as the rag bones and bottles men, and also the Karnofskys had a tailor shop. And if you look down at my feet, you'll still see the sign of the model tailors. Despite the influence of the Karnofskys, Louis was still something of a street urchin. And on New Year's 1912, he came down to Rampart and Perdido Street with a few of his friends, fired a gun in the air, and was taken into custody by a policeman that saw him do it. Luckily for him, a black veteran of the Spanish-American War named Joseph Jones had started a colored waifs home, a sort of reform school to keep kids out of a life of crime. And eventually, Louis is able to work his way into the colored waifs home band. He becomes its leader. And on his triumphant return to Rampart Street, he heads up the Colored Waifs Home Brass Band. Well, it was in one of these Labor Day parades that Louis comes under the notice of Kid Ory, whose band was playing ahead of his. And during the break, Ory seeks out the youngster and says, "Young man, I want to tell you something. You're doing pretty good on that horn, and I think if you stick with it, you may make something of yourself." Well, Ory was always a keen spotter of talent, but in this case it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, because just a few years later, Louis Armstrong would get his first regular professional music job playing in the Kid Ory Band. Louis gets a job playing on the riverboats with Fate Marable and his band. Musicians talked about joining Fate Marable's band as going to the conservatory, because there you were on the boat with nothing to do but play music and learn to play it better.
Man, come on, let's catch that boat. We'll be late.
Oh, we got plenty of time to catch that boat. I gotta get another hand.
Get back at me, don't even know how to carry a mule trap. Let the legs hang down, you little tadpole.
Louis left New Orleans in 1922 after getting a telegram from King Oliver asking him to join. Kid Ory had begged Louis to leave and go to Chicago with him a bit earlier, but somehow Louis was provincial, and he was scared to leave town. But he got over that when his idol Joe Oliver asked him to join. Louis had looked up to Joe Oliver his whole life, and this was a dream come true for him. He mustered up his courage, got his horn and a bag that contained a fish sandwich that was made by his mother, and boarded the train up to Chicago. He joined King Oliver's band, and in 1923 they made a series of recordings that are credited with taking jazz from simply a way of playing music and elevating it to the level of art form. This is the birthplace of Louis Armstrong. I'd like to show you the home, but it's gone. It was torn down some years ago to build this new traffic court building. As things stand today, New Orleans jazz is preserved on records and in photographs and in sheet music. But sadly, the places where this music was first aired, the places where these musicians first lived, are all but gone. A few crumbling buildings remain. The home of Buddy Bolden on 1st Street, Kid Ory's home on Jackson Avenue, King Oliver's place on Dryades Street, the home of Sidney Bechet on Murray Street, the Oddfellows Hall on Rampart, the Iroquois Theater, the Karnofsky Tailor Shop, all forgotten. And when history's forgotten, as in the case of Louis Armstrong's birthplace, oftentimes it's destroyed. I'd like to show you Louis Armstrong's childhood home where he lived with his mother and his sister here on Perdido Street, but it's gone as well. Well, Louis leaves King Oliver in 1924, goes to New York, plays with Fletcher Henderson's band, makes recordings with Sidney Bechet, and then returns to Chicago in 1925 to begin his Hot 5 and Hot 7 recording sessions. In a way, this band never existed. It was made up of people that were brought together around Louis Armstrong to make records. The record company contracted with Louis, and they said, look, just record your music. And he was given great freedom. Well, these records that happened over a course of about 2 years are the high watermark of New Orleans jazz. It never really got any better than that. Even though it wasn't really a band. They didn't play together anywhere. But there's an asterisk there, because 4 of the members of the Hot 5 were alumni of the Kid Ory Band of New Orleans, including Ory himself. So we kind of get maybe a hint back at what that old band sounded like. They play some of the same old songs. One of the most influential of all of their recordings was Potato Head Blues, particularly Louis's solo on it. In Potato Head Blues, the solo, Louis takes all of his tricks of the trade, growling the trumpet, blurring notes, bending notes, and puts them all into one solo. It's like a clinic on how to play jazz trumpet. In one of his films, the typically morose Woody Allen is trying to think what there could be in this world that's perfect, and about the only thing he can put his finger on is Louis's solo in Potato Head Blues. And I'll sort of leave you with this too. I've given you a lot of information today, and I've been rambling on for a couple of hours now. But I got one of my best lessons in jazz from the people who were on my tour. I gave this to a Danish tour group a couple of years ago, and the whole tour was interpreted. So I'd say da-da-da-da Louis Armstrong, and they go da-da-da Louis Armstrong. Or being Danish, I guess it was dunka-dunka-dunka Louis Armstrong. When we got to the solo in Potato Head Blues, the entire bus scattered the solo note for note and then erupted in applause for a jazz performance that was 73 years old. And that's when it really hit me. That's the power of New Orleans music. Of course, the whole time that the Jazz Age was going on, the person who was credited with really getting it started, Charles Bolden, was languishing in a mental hospital in Jackson, Louisiana. We know a little bit about what happened to him there. In the 1920s, sometimes his mother would visit and check up on him, and sometimes some people from the old neighborhood would come and see him. But clearly, he was not the man that people remembered as the King from 1905. One interesting thing was that sometimes the bands would come in and play for the patients. Bolden used to sit in with the band that used to come in and play for the patients as an early form of music therapy. And you know, the folks that heard him remembered that he sounded a little better than the other guys in the band. But his condition worsened, and in 1931 he died. The family didn't have enough money for proper burial, so Bolden was buried here at Holt Cemetery, the pauper's field for the city of New Orleans. It was an unmarked grave for many years because within 6 months of Bolden's death, the other members of his family passed away as well, so there was no way to maintain the grave. But in 1996, a group of New Orleans jazz fans got together and put this monument up to remember the man who Jelly Roll Morton called the blowingest since Gabriel. It's a fitting tribute to the man that got the ball rolling, who started the big noise that grew to become New Orleans jazz.
I started collecting these records when I was about 12, and this is what happens when you let a hobby get out of control. You wind up with thousands of them. But I really don't have any regrets, because among these thousands of records are great treasures like this one. This is Jelly Roll Morton's Dr. Jazz, and this is the original issue on Victor. In the early days, I used to do this in the bath and wipe off the old records with a towel. But nowadays, a cleaning machine is rather more sensible, because these early discs, particularly these early Victors, need to be cleaned as quickly as possible. You need to get the water on and off in the quickest possible time to avoid expanding material in the grooves and making the surface worse than it was to start with. It's taken about 30 years of experiment to develop the stereo and now surround sound system, which I used to create an impression of how these early records would have sounded in live performance. The first thing that I had to learn was how to replay the records properly. For instance, if you play one of these early 1926 recordings with a modern replay stylus, one meant for records made between 1945 and 1955, when 78s were discontinued, you'll find that it's rather unpleasant to listen to. There's lots of surface noise and lots of distortion in the music. And the reason for that is that the stylus is running along the bottom of the groove and picking up all of the damage and record wear of the years when this was played with steel needles. So you need to run a different stylus with it. And years of experience has taught me that the one to select from my range of 15 or so different stylus sizes, is a 0035 radius. And this will fit higher into the groove and miss all of that noise and distortion. And you can hear immediately the surface noise is more silken and the sound has lost a lot of that rasping edge. The next thing that has to be done is to get rid of as much of the crackle and plops in the original shellac surface, and that's done using a computer. And if we put it into the circuit, you'll hear that the noise immediately drops away. We can then start to tailor the sound for modern equipment, and that means using the banks of filters and equalizers which I have built into the system, and then running it through my mixing desk and adding in some ambience to give it a live sound, and a stereo spread which gives it the sense of a live performance instead of a rather truncated 78 RPM sound.
Ah, hello, symptoms, give me Dr. Jazz. He's got what I need, I say have.
Now, the reason for doing all of this is to try and recapture something of the excitement of a live performance. For me, I've always wanted to be able to go back to 1926 and hear Jelly Roll Morton's band in the flesh. But we do have the 78s. Unfortunately, they only give a partial representation of what the band sounded like in real life, because they're in monophonic sound of very truncated frequency response, and the recordings were made in a dead room. We get none of the lift and excitement that you get when you hear music played in a live acoustic. We add all of these things back into the recording in Jazz Classics in Stereo to try and give back some of that original excitement. And the net result is compact disc like this. This is one I made earlier, and we can listen to the first track on it, which is, would you believe, Jelly Roll Morton.
I wanted to see. I paid those doctors jazz in my dreams. Well, I'm trouble bound and mixed. He's the guy that gets me fixed. Hello, Central, give me Dr. Jazz.
Stefan's piece, take one. Well, you've seen Robert Parker, and he told you how he turned a scratchy old record into a thing of beauty. I'm going to talk about how I took reality, if you can call Mardi Gras street scenes reality. No, it's not reality, is it? We're kidding ourselves. And turned it into, well, not a thing of beauty, but something that vaguely works with Dippermouth Blues, which was the point of the exercise. Not that I knew I was going to use it for Dippermouth Blues when I filmed it. I mean, I was just wandering around praying that I would find something useful that I could use in this program. And I was wandering around with this camera. This camera is a Sony. It's called a PDP 150, and it's about $3,500. And it's brilliant. It's got a flip-out screen here, which isn't that much use if you're filming outside in daytime because you can't really see. At nighttime it's good. You can hold the camera up high and glance in here and see what you're filming. It's got another viewfinder besides the flip-out screen, and it's this one here. And you'd think I'm going to say this is the one I use, but in fact I hardly use that either. What I do is I hold the camera like this and I use my eyes to see what's happening, because the whole idea when you're doing this is to see what's happening, and things may be happening over here while you're shooting over here. So what I do is I try to keep the camera steady, try to keep my elbows into my chest, and I glance down at the scene from time to time, and then if I see something happening over here, I swing the camera, and that way I don't miss it. And so I've got my eyes open and I'm looking at the viewfinder. The same way as if you're driving a car, you kind of look in the rear vision mirror from time to time. That's what I'm doing. I'm glancing down here. The reason it works, well, the reason I think it works, you may look at my work and think, hey, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, is I'm using a wide-angle lens, and if I know that if I point the camera like that, it's going to get in most of the detail. Now, I have to be honest, I'm not using a wide-angle lens at all. I'm using an anamorphic lens, which has the same effect of a wide-angle. What have we got here? We've got a polarizing filter. This makes the sky look pretty and also turns down the exposure. You can't use these cameras at f/16 because they start photographing the muck that's on the lens. And I'm going to run you a bit from my tape, or my unedited tape, and you'll see muck on this lens. This is the anamorphic lens, which screws on. It's an extra. That is, you don't buy it with a camera. So looking through the anamorphic lens, this is what the shot really looks like. You can see everything squashed and people are kind of taller and thinner than they should be. But when you play it back on your DVD, the receiver knows that it's anamorphic and it unsquashes it and pulls it apart and it looks normal. This gives you a far better quality widescreen than if you actually just lopped off the top and lopped off the bottom. Then the other thing I carry It's not a tripod, but I carry a monopod. And I normally carry a monopod not to get steady shots, but to get high shots. And I screw the monopod into the base here, and I don't use, you can use a quick release thing, and you'd kill somebody if you did, because the camera would fall off. And I screw this right into the camera, and then I open this up so it's long and tall, and then it goes up very, very high, way, way higher than the ceiling in this room, and I get nice shots looking down on people. It is a dangerous thing to do. If you're pushed, you trip, you fall, this will land on somebody's head, and I'll be sued. But so far it hasn't happened. And because I can't see through the viewfinder, and in this case you actually do need to know what's going on, because it's hard to guess what's happening up there, I run a wire from this camera to this little baby. This is another Sony camera, and it's called a PC100, and I use it for filming the family and the kids and holidays and things. And I also take it as a backup camera if something goes wrong. In this case, what I do when I'm doing these high shots is I have this little camera down the bottom, have a wire from the top camera to this one, and I'm looking through this camera to see what this camera's filming. And it's tricky. Now I'm using the zoom control, which is unusual, because normally I work on a wide angle. But you can see once I've zoomed, all the flares that you were getting on the wide shot and the dirt on the lens, they've vanished. It's only when you're using the wide angle shot that you get this muck on the lens effect. And this was an easy sequence to edit. I chose the King Oliver solo at the end of Diplomat Blues, put that down, and then looked for shots to fit. And I think I finished the entire edit in less than an hour. And it worked out that I only used 5 shots. And they just seemed to drop in. I didn't have to fiddle with them much to get them to look as though they were dancing to the King Oliver music. And that's a rarity. Usually editing is tough. This one was easy.